Hey everyone, we're going to go through the Futato exercises for lesson 15, looking at first, noon, and III-Heh verbs. Basically, we're going to see what we've seen before is that weak verbs can affect the spelling of the vowels, that sort of a thing. But once we get into the one noon and the III-Heh, we're actually going to start to see that entire consonants are now disappearing and changing in verbs, and it can get a little confusing. So we're going to take the methodology that we've been using, the process of parsing that we've been using, and we're just going to expand it a little bit. So we've laid the foundation of how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do I have? Oh, that's the way we start. We're going to use that same process. We're just going to add some questions when we don't get the answers we expect. So hopefully it'll make sense. We're going to start off here with section B. I'm already told that these are weak roots, so that's helpful. I know that when I see something here, I need to think a little bit and not just assume, that I can guess based on what's in front of me. It's a little bit sneaky, but when you're out in the wild, when you're reading your Hebrew Bible, you're not going to know whether you're looking at a weak root or a strong root if you're not familiar, if you don't immediately recognize the verb. So always be ready for weak roots. Don't wait for someone to tell you that they are here. Always be suspicious of your Hebrew verb. Always be suspicious of the conjugation. Don't just jump to the first option. Really analyze the verb at this point. You will get to a point in Hebrew if you continue on where you will sort of by default automatically look at a verb and kind of know what it is. You wouldn't be able to read Hebrew fluently if you had to stop and parse every single verb. So I'm not saying you're going to do this forever, but at this point where you're still learning these forms, be very suspicious of the verbs that you see. Really analyze them, break them apart, and ask, is there any other possible parsing that might be here? Is there any other possible root that might be behind this verb? All right, so it may seem like we're belaboring the point here when we get 3 questions into our process and we've kind of figured out what the verbal root is. We're going to keep pushing because maybe we're wrong. Maybe there's another possibility, and we want to make sure that we're really examining the verb for all of the possibilities. So, like I said, starting off here, section B, we're looking at number 1. We've got yipol. Yipol. Okay, so if I'm parsing this verb, I come to it and I ask, how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do I have? 3. Perfect. Let's say, now you know this isn't going to be the case, but let's say that this is my root. My root would be Yod, Peh, Lamed. Now there's a couple problems with that right off the bat. Forget the fact that if I go into my lexicon and I look up Yod, Peh, Lamed, I'm not going to find anything. Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Peh, Tzadeh, Ko, Fresh. So there is no Yod, Peh root here. So forget the fact that if I go to my lexicon, I'm not going to find this root. There are other things that I'm looking at here that give me trouble as well. If this is my root, that means I have no prefix and no suffix. Well, the only verbal conjugation that we've learned so far that has no prefix and no suffix is the cow-perfect III-MS. And the cow-perfect III-MS would have a kametz in R1 and a patach in R2. So that can't be what it is. This can't be our root. So we have to ask, if this is not our root, but we do have 3 letters, then what's happened is we've lost a letter and gained a letter. All right? If we have the number of letters we're supposed to have, but it's not our root, that means that one of the letters of the root has been replaced. It's been lost and something else has been added. If something's just been lost, then we'll have too few letters. So we know that something else has been added because we've got the right amount of letters, but they are the wrong letters. So what could be added here? What could be additional? Now that we've asked how many letters a Hebrew verbal root is supposed to have, 3. How many do we have? 3. Okay, we think we've got an answer. This is our root, but now we find out, oh, that's a dead end. This is not our root. So now what do we do? Now we ask, since there's 3, we know that something has been lost and added. So let's start with what has been added, because that's easier to identify. Is the lamed added? Well, we never add lamed as part of a suffix. Is the pay added? Well, we've not seen anything that inserts a pay in the middle of a root. Is the yod added? Well, what conjugations have we seen where we add a yod prefix? That's the cal imperfect third person. It adds a yod heroic prefix. Perfect. Okay, so it looks like what we have here is a cal imperfect third person. It's third masculine because of the yod, and the fact that it has no suffix tells us it's third masculine singular. So now I can parse this out as a cal imperfect 3ms, but I still have to figure out what the root is, because once I take this yod off, I've only got 2 letters. I've only got a pay and a lamed. So what's missing now? I asked what's added, and I figured out that it was a yod. So now what's missing? If I'm just looking at the pay and the lamed, there's a couple possibilities. I could be missing something from the end, which would be a hey, in which case my root would be pay, lamed, hey. There's a couple problems with that. First of all, it doesn't explain the dagesh in the pay. For some reason, we've got a dagesh here, even though this begad kafat letter is preceded by a vowel sound rather than a consonant sound. So that tells us this is a dagesh forte. Why do we have a dagesh forte in R1? At this point, there's really only one reason to have that. Now, we will learn about other situations where you'll get a dagesh forte in R1, but at this point, the only time that happens is not when we have a third hey that gets lost, but when we have a one noon, and that noon assimilates into R2. And that little dot in the pay, that's that scaredy cat noon who, as soon as you add a prefix onto the front of the verb, he gets scared he's going to get squashed, and so he jumps and hides inside of the R2 letter. And so that dot, you can think of that dot as the noon all curled up in a ball hiding because he doesn't want to get squished by the prefix. Noons are quite timid. They are indeed scaredy cat letters in Hebrew. So this assimilation idea we've seen before. We've talked about it before with the min preposition. That's basically what's going on here. It's a scaredy cat. It doesn't want to get squished, so it rolls up into a ball and hides inside of the R2 letter. Well, if that's the case, if this is a one noon, then what is our root? Our root would be noon pay lamed. Is that a root that we see in our lexicon? And if you've learned your vocabulary, you will know that noon pay lamed is nafal, which means he fell. All right, so that one is logical. That one does make sense of what we're looking at. It fits perfectly. But we have to stop and ask, is there any other possibility? We've eliminated the third hey as a possibility because it doesn't account for the dagesh. We've accepted the one noon as a possibility because it does explain everything that we see here. And honestly, most of the time you're fine just stopping here. But when we learn about other conjugations, you'll see that a particular verb form might have more than one possibility, and you just want to be aware of all those. At this point, nothing else that we've learned makes sense. This isn't a one aleph because this isn't a one guttural, which we learned about last week. The one guttural verbs, it's not a one guttural because the gutturals won't drop out. We know it's not a third aleph because the aleph, even though it quiesces, it doesn't drop out. So it's not any of these that we've learned. Of the weak verbs that we've learned so far, the only one that makes sense is one noon. So now we've got our full parsing here. Cal imperfect, 3ms from nafal, which conjugated means he will fall. All right, we'll speed it up a little bit for the rest of these. Number 2, we've got kalata here. All right, how many letters is a Hebrew verbal root supposed to have? 3. How many do we have? We have 4. Okay, so what's going on here? What's extra? That's what we're going to start with. What's extra here? What's been added? Has the cough been added to the beginning? We haven't learned of any situation where we add a cough to a verbal root so far. So that doesn't make sense. He wouldn't be giving us something that did that. So we can dismiss the cough prefix. What about lamed? We haven't learned about anything that inserts lamed into a verbal root. What about the tav? Okay, so this is a little bit tricky. The tav here isn't really a tav. In these III-Heh verbs, there are three things that can happen to the III-Heh. All right, so III-Heh, when we've got the 3ms form, this is the basic form. But there are three things that can happen to that Zerchei here. When you've got a consonantal suffix, that is a suffix that begins with a consonant, so 2ms, 2fs, this is in the Cal Perfect, 1cs, 2mp, 2fp, 1cp, all of these suffixes begin with a consonant. When you add a suffix to a III-Heh verb that begins with a consonant, the III-Heh shifts to a Hirik Yod. All right? So the Zerchei drops out and a Hirik Yod pops in. The other thing that can happen is when you have a vocalic suffix. So when you have a vocalic suffix, like the shurik here, what happens is the Zerchei drops out altogether. It doesn't transform into a Hirik Yod, it just drops out altogether. So that's the second thing that can happen. The third thing that can happen, which is really, it's expansion of the second thing, is, let me pull up a Word document. All right, so let's go with Galah here is our verbal root. So the first thing that can happen to the Zerchei is if you add a consonantal suffix like the ta of the 2ms, then the Zerchei is going to shift to a Hirik Yod, and then you'll just attach the ta to the end. And again, we won't use the dagesh here in the ta because it's preceded by a vowel sound rather than a consonantal sound. So we don't need the dagesh in there. The other thing that we discussed is the III-Heh Zerchei might drop out altogether. And so in the case of the 3CP, where it's a shurik suffix, that's a vowel, we just add the shurik. Okay? So here it shifts to Hirik Yod. Here it drops out altogether. The third thing that can happen is if we were to take Galah, right? And then we were to add a Zerchei to it. Let's back that up. Let's add a space here. And then add a Zerchei. What does Rule 2 say that we do with a vocalic suffix? It says that the Zerchei drops out altogether, right? So we'll drop that out altogether. And then we'll put the suffix on. What's the problem here? The 3FS form with the Zerchei suffix would look identical to the 3MS form. That's a problem. So what Hebrew does here, and we've talked before about how there's kind of a connection, a relationship between the hey and the tav. We've seen that in the feminine endings. The Zerchei, when you go into construct, will shift to a patak tav. The Zerchei will shift to a holam vav tav. The relationship there between the hey and the tav. What we have to do in this situation is we're going to take a couple ways you can think of it. The way I like to think of it is you can't add a suffix to a hey. Hey doesn't take suffixes. It's too weak. It can't hold a suffix. It's a very weak sort of ending. And so what it has to do is you got to toughen it up a little bit. You got to toughen up this weak hey and make it into not a weak letter, but make it into a strong tav. And they kind of look the same too, look very similar. If you were to toughen up this hey, you could toughen it up into a tav. Tav is a tough letter. It's a strong letter. It can take suffixes. And so what happens here is we get the comet's hey going on the hardened tav instead of the hey. Now, understand me. I am not saying morphologically this is technically the process of what happens. I'm just trying to give you a good way to remember this process. Really, there are two things that can happen to a III-Heh verb when you add a suffix. If the suffix begins with a consonant, the comet's hey shifts to a hirik yod. So let's write that out here. Oh boy. Consonant, suffix. However, if it begins with a vowel, if the suffix begins with a vowel suffix, then you're going to get a drop in the comet's hey. So consonantal suffix equals, let's just say, hirik yod shift. Vocalic suffix equals comet's hey drop. All right, those are the two things that can happen. But when you apply the comet's hey drop to the III-Fs form, what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a form identical to the III-Ms, and they don't want that. So in this particular situation, let's just call this a comet's hey suffix. In this particular situation, third hey shifts to tav. All right. And then you add your suffix to it. All right, so those are the three things with the comet's hey. All right, so now let's go back to the exercises. And we'll look at ka latah here. And so we ask, how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do we have? 4. What is extra? We've already said that the kaf doesn't get added as a prefix, at least so far. Lamed, we've not seen lamed inserted into a verbal root as an infix. What about tav? Well, we have seen a III-Heh verb harden its III-Heh into a tav when we have the comet's hey suffix. And the time when that happens is in the cal-perfect III-Fs. So we have cal-perfect III-Fs. Since we know this is a III-Heh verb, our verbal root is kaf lamed hey, which is kala. Kala, I get mixed up. I think kala means he finished or he ceased, but I do need to double check that here. I get that mixed up with another. Yeah, to cease, to end. It only means to finish something. This implies, this would be transitive. It implies a direct object. That only happens in the PL. When you're in the cal, it means that you yourself stop. It doesn't mean you complete something necessarily. It means you stop acting. It means that you end what you're doing. Now, that could be euphemistically a way of saying that you yourself are done, either done with an action or done in your being. So it could be a euphemism for fading away, wasting away, or even dying. But this is the word that is used in Genesis 1 when we see that God ceased from his work when he rested on the seventh day. Rested is a different word, but he ceased from the work that he had done. This is the word kala. All right. So with kala, we've got, if kala means he ceased, then ka latah is going to mean she ceased. Number 3, how many letters does the Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do we have? We have 4. What's extra? Okay, well, let's start at the end. Is the hey going to be extra? Well, hey isn't really added as a suffix, at least not yet. We haven't seen anything that adds a hey as a suffix. It is often part of a verbal root, the third heys, so let's keep that in mind. This might be a third hey verb, but the hey, if it's a third hey verb, would be part of the root, not extra. All right, what about the tav? Is the tav part of the root, or do we know of any conjugations where we add a tav to the beginning? Well, sure enough, the cal imperfect, third feminine and second person forms, all of those forms will add a tav. Do any of those forms add a tav to the beginning and a hey to the end? No. The only thing that adds a hey to the end, I missed this earlier, would be a cal perfect III-Fs, but that's not what we have here because we have a... Well, okay, let's start with that. Let's start with that might be the case. If that's the case, because I missed that option as we were going through our process here. So how many letters does Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do we have? 4. What's extra? Is the hey extra? Do we know of any conjugations that add a hey to the end of a root? Yes, the cal perfect III-Fs does that. Okay, if that's what we have here, then our root would be tav, ayin, sen. I was going to say shen, and then I had to think, wait, which side does the dot go on? Tav, ayin, sen here. Okay? If this is our root, and this is our III-Fs ending, there's a problem. This should be a kametz, not a segel. Furthermore, if it's cal perfect, this should be a kametz, and it's a patach. So we've got 2 problems here with this being a cal perfect III-Fs. So maybe it's not a suffix. Maybe it's part of the root. Okay. So if this is part of the root, we certainly don't know of anything that adds a sen inside the verbal root or an ayin inside the verbal root. So the extra part must be the tav. All right, so let's look at this tav. Do we know of any conjugations that add a tav prefix? Yes. Cal imperfect third feminine, or cal imperfect second masculine or second feminine. The plural forms add a suffix. There is no suffix here. So this is either cal perfect III-Fs, cal perfect 2ms, or cal perfect 2fs. 2fs adds a hirik yod prefix, so it's not 2fs. This is either 3fs or 2ms. Now, we should ask, well, if this is a cal imperfect 3fs or 2ms, why don't we have a hirik in the prefix? That's because we have a weak first root letter. This is going to be a one guttural. And remember, the one gutturals prefer the A-class vowels. And they also don't like to have a shavah. So the ayin here is going to, stand up for itself and demand an A-class vowel before it. It doesn't like a shavah, so it's going to use a hatef vowel. And since it likes A-class vowels, it's going to use the A-class hatef vowel. And so that explains this vowel pattern here. But what about the segel? We still don't understand the segel. If this is a third hey, why do we have a segel here? All right, we will eventually build a table of third hey endings. And I'm just going to start off here. So let's do it this way. So far we've learned 2 conjugations that use the third hey, or that apply to the third hey. We've learned the perfect, and we've learned the, how do we want to do this? Imperfect, I guess. So we'll do it this way. Okay. So the perfect, when you have a third hey in the perfect, it is going to end the 3ms form when there's no suffix on it, which is only the 3ms in the perfect conjugation. It is going to end with a kametz hey. However, when you get in the imperfect, if there is no suffix, the third hey is going to end consistently with a segel hey. This is not the way I want to set up the chart because when we add more, it's going to have to get really long. So let's do it this way. Perfect. There we go. Okay. It's tricky when you're typing in Hebrew because the keyboard goes the wrong way. All right. Later on, we will add to this a few other... Oh, my word. There we go. We will add a few other conjugations like the infinitive, which will have a construct form and an absolute form. The construct form will end in the Zerchei is going to shift to a Holam Vav Tav. In the absolute form, the Zerchei is going to shift to a Zerchei. And then we will also eventually learn the imperative form, in which we will also have a Zerchei here. So what you're going to see is that III-Heh endings, when they have no suffix, they're going to look a little bit different depending on the conjugation. In the perfect, they'll look like a Zerchei. In the imperfect, they'll look like a Zerchei. In the infinitive construct, they'll look like a Holam Vav Tav. Infinitive absolute, they'll look like a Zerchei. And in the imperative, they'll look like a Zerchei. But again, we'll get to these next semester. These are the only ones you need to know about now. But that's why we have a Zerchei here instead of a Zerchei, because we're in the imperfect conjugation. All right, so we know we're in the Cal imperfect. We know that we're in the III-Fs or the II-Ms. Those two forms will look identical. And then, since this is our prefix, our root is a sa. A sa means he did or he made. So the Cal imperfect III-Fs form would mean she will do or she will make. And the Cal imperfect II-Ms form will mean you, masculine singular, will do or will make. Number 4, I said we were going to go faster. It's not working. But I want to be as explicit and descriptive as I can, because this really starts to get tricky if you don't see all the little changes. And I'm just trying to help you develop a process or a methodology that will notice all of these changes. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Number 4, all right. How many letters is the Hebrew verbal root supposed to have? 3. How many do we have? We have 3. Perfect. Oh, except not. Remember, we ran into trouble up here. So we need to be suspicious. I'm suspicious. Even though we have 3 root letters, I'm suspicious that this is the root. Let's dig deeper. All right, well, if this were the root, there were no prefix and no suffix, the only time that's going to happen so far that we've learned about is in the Cal Perfect III-Ms. But in the Cal Perfect III-Ms, we expect to find a Kametz Patak pattern, not a Hirik Patak pattern. Furthermore, we certainly don't expect to see a Dagesh inside R2, even if it is a Bagad Kafat letter. So there's something fishy about this verbal root. I don't think it's real. And I can confirm that. Now, you can't always... We've already disqualified that as an option. We already know that's not the root. But in addition to that, if we were to go over here into our lexicon and look up Nagash is a verbal root, actually. That's not the verbal root here. Actually, it is. That is the verbal root here. This is why it's so tricky, okay? This is the verbal root, Nagash, but this noon is not the noon of the root. This is the noon of a prefix, okay? This is a really good one because it's real tricky. All right, so let's dig into this one a little bit. And I apologize if I sound way too excited to be talking about Hebrew parsing, but this is a clever one, okay? So let's dig in here. If I were to go look up Nun Gimel Shin, I would find an entry here because Nagash is a Hebrew root. Let's find it here. There you go. Nagash, to approach or to step forth. The problem is, in the Cal Perfect, it's supposed to have a Kametz Patak vowel pattern. And that's not the vowel pattern that we have here. So what in the world is going on? Do we know of any conjugation so far that gives us a Hirik in R1? And since this is preceded by a vowel sound instead of a consonant sound, this would have to be a Dagesh forte. Now, you will learn a conjugation next semester where this looks so close to what we call a PL perfect. The only difference is we would have a Zerchei here. But that's not what this is either, because it doesn't have a Zerchei. So what could this be? Why would we have a Hirik Patak instead of a Kametz Patak vowel pattern? It doesn't make sense. Well, it doesn't make sense because this Nun is not part of our root. Now, we can go through this letter by letter to get to that conclusion, and let's go ahead and do it. We know that there's something strange about this. Our root is not this letter, and this letter. Something has been taken away and something has been added. And we're not quite sure what yet. All right, just like we had up here with number 1. Something is missing and something is added. So, what is the added part? We always start with what is the added part rather than what is the missing part, because it's easier to find the added part. So, is the shin added? Do we know of any conjugation that adds a shin suffix? No. Do we know of any conjugation that adds a gimel within the verbal root? No. Do we know of any conjugation that adds a nun prefix? We do. That's the cal perfect, or the cal imperfect 1CP. And it does add a nun Hirik prefix. Okay, so let's take that off. Let's get rid of that. We're left with gash. All right, so what would we be missing from gash? We could be missing the third hey, the third root letter, hey, but we only that only drops out altogether so far when we have a consonantal suffix, and there is no suffix at all. So third hey doesn't explain what's going on. Furthermore, third hey would not explain the Dagesh forte in R1. The other that we've learned so far, and I'm excluding what you're learning in chapter... actually, no, we haven't even learned the one. You guys aren't on one yods yet. That is actually, I think, next semester. Yeah, you won't get to one yods until next semester. So the only thing that we've learned so far that disappears, aside from the third hey, is the one nun. And in that case, we do get the nun curling up into a little ball and hiding inside of what looks like R1, but it's actually R2, the second root letter, not the first root letter. All right, well, that makes sense of what we've got here. This is a nun Hirik prefix on nagash. Okay, so that means that we've got a cal imperfect 1CP from nun gimel shin, which means nagash is to approach, right? That was it. Approach or step forward. I'm pretty sure that was it. There's a lot of one nuns that have very similar meanings. Nagash here to approach. So in the 1CP of the cal imperfect, that would be we will approach. All right. Number 5. Now number 5 is a little bit easier because it has something that's just going to jump out at you. Whenever you see this tem suffix, I mean, almost all the time this tem suffix is going to indicate that you have a cal perfect 2MP. You could already parse this. So let's just take that off right away and ask ourselves, what's left? What is our root? We have a chet, a zayin, and a yod. Well, we haven't learned any verbs that end in a yod, that have the yod as the third root letter. And I will tell you right now as a shortcut, if you take off your prefixes and suffixes and what you're left with ends with a yod, very good chance you're looking at a third hey. So we'll take off the tem and we'll ask, we now have 3 letters, but the yod doesn't make any sense as a letter. How do we make sense of the yod? I mean, the chet never gets added as a prefix. The zayin never gets added as an infix. What about the yod? Does the yod ever replace the third root letter? Yes, in the third hey is when we have a consonantal suffix, the Kametz hey shifts to a Hirik yod. And so that's what we've got here. Cal perfect 2MP from chazah. All right. So if chazah means he saw or he beheld, then chazitem is going to mean you all saw or you all beheld. Number 6, we've got Baninu. Baninu, this, how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do we have here? We have 5. So what's extra? All right, do we ever add bait as a prefix? Not yet. Again, we will when we get into these infinitive constructs. We will learn that they can have prepositions added to them. And if they do, then we might have a cough prefix or a bait prefix, but we haven't learned that yet. So bait must be part of the root. We haven't learned anything that adds a noon infix into the middle of a root. Yod is here. That's worth keeping an eye on. Yod reminds us of III-Heh, so we'll just keep that in the back of our minds. Another noon, we don't know of anything that adds a noon in the middle of a root, but we do know of a new suffix, noon shuric suffix. That's the suffix that we get in the cow-perfect 1CP. So let's take that off. Let's take off the noon shuric suffix, and we're left with bani. Bani, again, we've got a quote-unquote root ending in a yod. Just jump to III-Heh on that. If we replace the hiric yod with a comet's hey, do we end up with a root that we're familiar with? And we do. Bana, he built, has become Baninu in the cow-perfect 1CP, and so our root is beit nu hey. If bana means he built, then baninu means we have built or we built. Number 7, we've got tig-i. Actually, tig-i. This is a doggish forte here. Tig-i. Tig-i has 4 letters. We need 3 in a root. So what's extra? Well, do we ever add hiric yod as a suffix to a Hebrew verbal root in any of the conjugations? There's one time where we add just a hiric yod. We do add a tav hiric yod in the cow-perfect 1CS, but there's no tav here. The only time we add just a hiric yod as a suffix is when we also add a tav hiric as a prefix. That is in the cow-perfect 2FS. So if we take off our hiric yod suffix and our tav hiric prefix for the cow imperfect 2FS, we're left with the gimel, which has a doggish forte, and the ayin. So what are we missing? So far we've learned 2 options. We might be missing a III-Heh, and the III-Heh does shift to a hiric yod sometimes, but only when we have a consonantal suffix, and there's no suffix here at all. So III-Heh doesn't make any sense. What about the 1 noon? Well, sure enough, in a 1 noon, when we add a prefix, that noon is going to curl up into a ball and hide inside of the second root letter. All right, and so that's what we've got here. We've got a cow imperfect 2FS form of nagah. Nagah, I'm pretty sure, again, I got to get my 1 noon straight, but I think nagah means to touch or to strike. And I do get it mixed up with nagash. So let's take a look here. Nagah. Yeah, to touch, to hurt. It can also mean to strike. All right. Actually, am I thinking of nakah? See, these are very similar. Nagah, nagash, nakah. Nakah might mean to strike. Let's just go with to touch or to hurt or to harm with nagah. So if nagah means he touched, then tig-i would mean you, feminine singular, will touch. Number 8, we have ra'ita. Ra'ita, we have 4 letters here. We're supposed to have 3, so what's extra? Do we ever add resh as a prefix? No. Do we ever insert an aleph into a root? No. So these must be part of the root. What about hiric yod? Remember, whenever you see hiric yod, just start thinking III-Heh in your brain, okay? But no, hiric yod isn't a suffix. So, what about the tav? Tav kametz. Do we ever add tav kametz as a suffix? Yes, in the cow-perfect 2MS, we add tav kametz as a suffix. So if we take that off, we're left with the root resh aleph yod. And again, yod as our 3rd letter doesn't make sense, but when we point that back to a III-Heh, and we transform the hiric yod back into a comet's hey, we have ra'ah. Is ra'ah a verb that we've learned? Yes, ra'ah means he saw. So if ra'ah, when we add the consonantal suffix, kamatse shifts to hirik yod. If ra'ah becomes ra'iti, or sorry, ra'ita, ra'ah becomes ra'ita, this then means you, masculine singular, saw. So we have a cow perfect 2ms form of ra'ah. All right. Let me check the assignment here real quick. I'm going to do B, C, E, F, and G. So let's go to C. We're just going to, this is review. So we're looking at the construct state here. So I'm just going to point out in each of these how you know it's construct. So number 1, makom. If this were absolute, we would have a kametz under the mem here. Makom becomes makom. Number 2, we have susat, kametz tav. Patak tav is our feminine singular construct ending. Susa would be the absolute form. Susot would be plural, and then sus would be masculine singular. Number 3, we've got zerchei. Again, sere yod here indicates masculine plural of the construct. If it were absolute, it would be zevachim, and then just zevach would be the singular form. All right. So zivchei, sere yod is going to be the suffix indicating construct. Nafshot here. This is construct. It's a little bit tricky because the ot ending occurs in the feminine plural construct and the feminine plural absolute. But if this were the absolute, I think you would actually have the shava would be under the noon, and you'd have a kametz under the pei. Nefashot. That's the pattern that the seglets follow when they go into the holam vav tav plural ending. So nafshot is the construct form. Number 5, kasfei. Kasfei, sere yod indicates masculine plural construct. If we take that off, we get kaf samic pei, which is kesef. Kesef is a seglet. So it would be kesafim, I'm pretty sure, if it were plural absolute. Number 6, we get milchemet. Milchemet is from milchama. Milchemet is the feminine singular construct form of milchama. The tav, instead of milchamat form, devar, if this were, this is masculine singular construct. If it were masculine singular absolute, it would have a kametz pattern. Number 8, torat, the feminine singular construct form here. Feminine singular absolute would be Torah. Zahav, this would be kametz if it were absolute. Number 10, we've got mishpachat. Again, same as milchemet, it goes into a seglet pattern for the feminine singular construct, but because you've got a chet here between the two vowels, the chet wants a patak instead of a segel. I know you've got a chet here, but here it's actually between the vowels, so it wants the patak before and after. Number 11, we've got mishpachot. And I'm pretty sure that mishpachot, well, it's obviously construct because we're told it's construct. I'm pretty sure the absolute form here would be mishpah with a kametz, mishpachot. That's because in Hebrew, when you have an open syllable before the accent, we call this open pretonic, that really wants to have a long vowel. Okay, so why doesn't it have a long vowel then? Because this is not the tonic anymore. In the construct, it gives up its accent. The accent is given up to the next word. And so this is no longer pretonic, this is like pro-pretonic. And so that's why it doesn't have a long vowel here. But if this were absolute and the accent were here, then the open pre-tonic syllable would require a long vowel, and we would have the kamets. Number 12, we've got sifrei. Sifrei is masculine plural construct. Masculine plural absolute would be sefarim. So the segel would, or I'm sorry, the shava would be under the samek, then we'd get a kametz under the pei, and then the hirik yod mem. Number 13, yad. This is construct because the absolute, I'm pretty sure, is yod kametz dalet. Let's double check. Yeah, yod kametz dalet right there. All right, number 14, Zerchei. Zerchei is from derech. This is masculine plural construct, as you know by the serei yod here. If this were absolute, it would be derachim. So again, the shava would be under the dalet, the resh would get a kametz. Again, that's pro-pretonic. The open pro-pretonic syllable would have a long vowel there, just like up here in mishpachot. Number 15, we have mishpatei, serei yod again, masculine plural construct. If this were absolute, not only would it be team instead of te, hirik yod mem, but this pei again would lengthen to a kametz. It would be open pre-tonic, and so we would have mishpatim. And then number 16, we have onshei. Onshei comes from enosh, or anashim, and anashim hirik yod mem, I think actually is, yeah, anashim, I think this would be like a hatef patak, and then a kametz here. Let's take a look at that though, because I know it's in one of like the notes sections afterwards. Yeah, here we go, anashim. So again, in this particular case, the reason why we get the reduced vowel here and the long vowel kametz here is because we have an open pre-tonic syllable, so we want the long vowel. And this one then is a pro-pretonic syllable, so it gets reduced. All right, let's go back here. All right, so that was C. We'll look at E, F, and G. E, we've got more parsing, and I've only got 7 minutes left, so I'll go through these much more quickly, and I'll just kind of point out to you what you should be seeing. Shalach is strong. There's nothing irregular here. We've got a yod-hirik prefix with the shurik suffix, so that's cal imperfect 3 MP of shalach. Number 2, we've got avarnu. Again, nothing irregular here. The vowels do what we expect. The letters do what we expect. It is a one guttural, but that doesn't affect this in the cal perfect. So this is cal perfect 1 CP. Third, we have ga Allah, and the only irregularity here is R2 in a cal perfect 3 FS would normally go to a shava, but again, this guttural doesn't like shavas, so it takes a hatef vowel. Number 4, we've got ekach. Ekach here is from lakach, and the lamed in lakach acts like a one noon. One of my professors described it as the lakach and halach are the 2 Hebrew orphan verbs. They don't have their own family, and so lakach gets adopted into the one noon family, and it conjugates like a one noon a lot of the time. That's what happens here. The lamed assimilates into the kof. Halach gets adopted into the one yod family, which we'll learn about next semester. But this is lakach that's acting like a one noon. It has assimilated into R2. Aleph segel indicates cal imperfect 1 CS, and so that's what we've got here. Number 5, we've got kaliti. The kametz hey of kala has shifted to a hirik yod, and then we've got our T suffix for cal perfect 1 CS. Number 6, timtsa. This is from matzah. We've got a tav heric prefix, so that's cal imperfect 3fs or 2ms. Nothing irregular there, except for the fact that we've got a kametz here. Usually in the cal imperfect, we'll have a patach or a holum. Here we get a kametz because the aleph can't close the syllable, and so the patach lengthens to a kametz. Number 7, we've got nemloch. This is perfectly regular, malach. Nun heric prefix indicates cal imperfect 1cp. And then number 8, we've got kaved. This is actually a lexical form. This is because it's stative, it has a serif theme vowel instead of a patach. But this is cal perfect 3ms. Number 9, we've got yiplu, yipalu. Yipalu comes from nafal. The one nun has assimilated into R2. So we've got a yod heric prefix with a suffix, one nun assimilated. Yod heric prefix plus shuric suffix indicates a cal imperfect 3mp of nafal. Number 10, we've got matzah, and this is pretty regular. The only difference is because of the quiescent aleph, the patach lengthens to a kametz, and also because of the quiescent aleph, this is not a consonant, so there is no silent shavah here, and because there's no silent shavah here, we lose the dagesh lene, the weak dagesh in the tav kametz suffix. So tav kametz suffix is cal perfect 2ms. Looking at F, we're just going to do the longest translation here, which looks like number 8. So Yisa am haaretz he chazak al haderek la milchama. So first word, I'm just going to expect this to be a verb. If this is a verb, I have to figure out how many letters Hebrew verb are supposed to have. 3. I have 3. Perfect, except I'm suspicious. And I'm suspicious especially because R1 has a heric, and that is not what I should expect from a cal perfect 3ms. So here, yod heric is the prefix, and what I've lost is the one nun, which has assimilated into R2. So when you see that dagesh right after a prefix, at this point, you need to be thinking one nun. When you see a dagesh right after a prefix. All right, so this is nasa. Nasa, I'm pretty sure, oh man, there's also a nasa that ends with an aleph. That means to take up or lift up, or it can mean forgive, to remove, to take away. But the nasa with the ayin, I'm going to have to look up here. That is to start out. Okay, so this is to like begin a journey or to get on the move, that sort of a thing. So we've got yod heric is cal imperfect 3ms. He started out. Haaretz. Since this is third person, this is probably my subject. Haaretz is construct. Because the absolute is definite, so is the construct. So this can't be my direct object, because if I had a definite direct object, I'd have et here. So haaretz, the people of the land, started out. But then I have an adjective, chazak, the strong. The people of the land, the strong. So does the strong modify the people or the land? Well, I know eretz looks masculine singular, but it's actually feminine. Is masculine, so this is the strong people of the land started out, upon, haderech, upon the road or the path or the way, la milchama, to, lamed preposition to, definite article, patach dagesh, to the milchama, to the battle. So the strong people of the land started out upon the road to the battle. All right, and then G, I'm actually out of time, so I'm not going to do G here, but obviously getting into, I like what he does here in G. I just wish he gave you the whole verse. Even though you're going to see stuff you haven't seen, it's good to be exposed to that stuff. Now, part of the reason why he doesn't is you don't have, him there coaching you through those things. But which I would normally do. But again, I'm out of time. So hope this is helpful. If you guys have any questions, send them my way. Hope you guys have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.